Okay, our third speaker is Avery Lindeman, who comes from the Green Science Policy Institute up at Berkeley. And she comes with bachelor's and master's degrees in chemistry. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Green Science Policy Institute, they've done just an amazing job in the state of California in terms of really bringing awareness around the issue of flame retardants and engaging the public in substantive ways to get action on that item. So it's super pleasure to have you here, and looking forward to your talk.
Hi. Let's see. So I am Avery with the Green Science Policy Institute. I was going to take a second with this first slide just to explain some of the work that we do. We're a nonprofit in Berkeley. And we facilitate more responsible use of chemicals, primarily in consumer and also building products, through a combination of education of the general public and various stakeholders. Through research, we collaborate with academic and also government scientists on peer-reviewed research, and we help to publicize peer-reviewed studies that can be useful for policy and purchasing change, and also through convening of diverse stakeholder groups that have the power to improve both regulation and voluntary chemical policies. And we've spent a lot of our focus for the last 10 years has been on the issue of flame retardant chemicals. Flame retardants are used primarily to meet fire safety regulations. Some major product categories where they're used include electronics, iPhones, for instance, computers, laptops, TVs. They're common in building materials to meet various code regulations, the transportation sector due to federal transportation flammability standards, and also, for instance, home furnishings. So particularly in California, flame retardants have been used in residential upholstered furniture for decades because of a regulation called Technical Bulletin 117, or TB 117. And this regulation basically required the filling inside home furniture to withstand a candle-like flame for 12 seconds. And it turns out that the most affordable way for manufacturers to comply with this rule was to add chemical flame retardants to foam fillings, which are widely used. They're affordable. A study that we collaborated on that was published in 2012 did a survey of about 100 different residential furniture filling materials, and found that only about 12% of those did not contain added flame retardant chemicals. Most of those did come from California, but a variety came from outside of the state. So one thing we observed with this was that even though it was a California state regulation, companies were selling furniture that met this standard throughout the US increasingly. And the other takeaway from this was that within California, furniture that met TB 117 had to be labeled as meeting TB 117. And if you had that label on your furniture, you were pretty guaranteed to have flame retardants. The converse was not true. So if you found a piece of furniture without a label, you couldn't just assume that there were no flame retardants present. So it was widely believed that that regulation improved fire safety. That was the rationale for instituting this requirement in the 1970s in the first place. But a variety of studies did compare full-scale fire behavior of upholstered furniture that met TB 117 with furniture that did not. And it turns out that furniture that met that standard really didn't perform in a consistent, better way to normal furniture. On the flip side, because of that standard, flame retardants became essentially a household staple in homes throughout California, which have higher levels than other parts of the US. And beyond. And for instance, penta-BDE, which is a common flame retardant that was used in polyurethane foams for many decades, could easily migrate out of foam where it was added but not chemically bound. It would end up in house dust, and then a major route of exposure to that particular flame retardant is through hand-to-mouth contact, particularly for infants, which could have 3 to 5 times the levels of their parents due to their normal behavior. Pets as well, which have specific grooming behaviors. This is an oversimplification of exposure to flame retardants. Different chemicals have slightly different chemical properties, and so dermal exposure and inhalation can also be important. But this is a really clear example of how chemicals added to a furniture product, which was never really evaluated for human health because, who thought we would have to deal with a human health issue with furniture, actually does result in continued long-term exposures to the general population. So again, penta-BDE is one of the best studied flame retardant chemicals used in furniture. And human epidemiological studies have connected higher levels of penta with a longer time to get pregnant, as well as altered thyroid hormone functioning in the body. Children with higher levels of penta-BDE sometimes had lower birth weight, often had lower IQ, and some studies have tried to calculate the cost to the general population from penta-BDE exposures and IQ losses. There was a study last year that looked at the cost to the EU associated with PBDE's exposure, slightly different, but it's in the tens of millions of dollars. It's a huge cost, which again we don't see on an individual basis, but population-wide has a huge impact. Around the same time that we surveyed couch fillings, we also looked into children's products because under the TB 117 regulation, certain children's products were actually considered juvenile furniture. And so we also did a study with Heather Stapleton's group at Duke, looking at about 100 different children's products to try to understand which of them tended to contain flame retardants and what flame retardants were present. And this was done in 2011, so it was after the 2005 phase out of that penta-BDE flame retardant I talked about. And similar to the results we saw with furniture, a wide variety of different flame retardant chemicals were found. All of these are organohalogens, so they have similar physical and chemical properties, similar exposure routes, and the data is more limited on these replacements, but there's cause for concern. So it's again that whack-a-mole situation. And really what was driving this was the standard, the TB 117 standard. And so we and other NGOs within the state of California tried to improve these requirements. For instance, in 2010, the state of California did exempt 3 specific children's products from the TB 117 requirements. That was a step in the right direction, at least. That enabled these manufacturers to use foam without added flame retardants. The bigger change came in 2012 after an excellent expose in the Chicago Tribune that detailed some of the tactics of the chemical industry, as well as widespread exposures, the lack of fire safety benefit, and other aspects of this story. And that prompted Governor Brown to direct the state agency in charge to update their test method in a way that could reduce the use of flame retardants for Californians and for North America. So as part of that, additional children's products were exempted. So there are a total of 18 products now that don't need to meet flammability standards in the state of California because there's really no reasonable fire safety rationale for requiring them to meet the standard. But more importantly, the test method itself was changed. And so rather than that small open flame test for filling materials, which had no relationship to what might actually happen in a home if an ignition source comes into contact with furniture, this new test method is a smolder standard. Smoldering sources like cigarettes are the #1 cause of upholstered furniture fires and fire deaths. And it also can be met without flame retardants. So what we have here is an instance where the standard itself was changed, fire safety is maintained or possibly improved. It's too soon to tell statistically to try to tease that out. And even more importantly, in a separate legislative change, there's now a labeling requirement for furniture in the state of California. So if you go to the store and you try to buy upholstered furniture, you can look for this TB 117 2013 label, and manufacturers are now required to disclose if the furniture contains added flame retardant chemicals or not. So that's extremely useful for consumers that want to avoid these chemicals. You'll notice that the language on this label is really broad. It talks about added flame retardant chemicals as a class rather than identifying specific chemical species. That's been really challenging with industry who sees difficulties with enforcing this and making sure that they're in compliance. But this has been a huge step forward and hopefully can be a model for other regulatory and legal improvements. The flip side to this is that because the children's products have been exempted, you won't be able to find this kind of label on children's products at the store. But we're increasingly seeing new furniture manufactured without added flame retardants. On the right here, I've included data from a 2016 publication from that same group at Duke University. They have Superfund funding. They'll actually take free samples from consumers. I think they do about 50 a month of polyurethane foam, and they screen for a whole suite of known flame retardant chemicals. And they've observed that after 2014, which is when that new flammability standard took effect, there's a much higher likelihood that your polyurethane foam does not contain flame retardants. And as that market shifts, we'll see that impact in kids' products as well. On the flip side, there are certain products that still meet other requirements. I mentioned transportation. Children's car seats are one specific example where the car seat itself has to meet the same requirements that the materials used in the passenger compartment of your vehicle needs to meet. And so currently almost all children's car seats contain flame retardants. Now, of course, kids' car seats are really important from a safety standpoint. So what we advise is that consumers should limit the use of the car seat to when kids are actually in the car, and find other ways to carry kids around and keep them comfortable and happy when they're not in the car, basically to minimize exposures. I think there's maybe one brand now of car seats without flame retardants. It is a little bit more expensive, unfortunately, so hopefully the market will shift. And the Ecology Center in Michigan has some good resources specifically on car seats for parents that want to learn more. And just general recommendations, because it is still difficult beyond upholstered furniture to avoid flame retardants. If you can keep dust levels down, that's one good way to reduce exposures. Also frequent hand washing. And definitely do ask retailers and manufacturers for products without, or at least for information about what's in the products so that we can start sending those consumer market signals. Oh, I forgot I had this. One final note is that even though California's standard has improved, there are voluntary as well as federal projects underway that could potentially reverse that. So it's really important for NGOs as well as consumers to stay informed and register their displeasure at that. These could potentially undo the progress made in California, but hopefully they won't. And I'll just skip this, but talk to me after if you want to learn about our 6 classes. Thanks.